This will actually probably be a fairly brief talk since we've covered most of this anyway. And once again, it's my editorial about how to do research and just how to get you started and thinking about it. So I wholeheartedly admit that research is not for everyone. A lot of people don't enjoy the research process. They alter their practices so that they don't have to do research. There's a wide variety of things that you can do with research in medicine: clinical research, basic science research, mining databases, all sorts of things that allow you to publish and to publish things that are meaningful. Also remember that research involves a fair amount of writing. And because anytime you do research, the idea is that you're going to get it published somewhere, and that involves the writing process. So start writing early, write often, and continue to write. As I said, wide variety of research available in neurosurgery. And just as an example, all of our residents do research at the University of Wisconsin. They start out with an early 3 to 6 month block in their residency, and then they have another 6 months that they have to do at some point. What we try to teach our residents is that research is a lifelong process, and that at least during your residency that it should continue throughout the entire residency. And how do faculty do research? I mean, most of us are busy operating. Some people protect their time, but protected time in surgery is not a reality. And so you end up doing your research at night and on the weekends. Most people have labs where they have PhDs and other people to do the bench part and have lab meetings every week. So a variety of ways you can do it. Research can be done on a limited budget, but I mean limited budget means not having a formal lab, but having access to databases or prospectively collecting a database at your institution and doing research studies and publishing papers based upon what's done. This gets me to this. How many people think that this is a safe way to prevent yourself from being hurt when jumping out of an airplane? Right? So there's no randomized study that talks about the safety of parachutes when jumping out of an airplane. And somebody went through this whole thing and did all the statistics on it. And so there's no class 1 evidence that a parachute prevents you from being hurt when you jump out of an airplane. So general advice: when you do research, pick a topic that interests you. Nothing is worse than sitting around and doing a project that you have no interest in, all right? And it has to be a topic that deserves investigation. So much of what we see these days when we review articles for journals is stuff that's been published already, that's been well talked about. A case, if you're doing the 95th case in the literature of something reported, it's really not that interesting, and it's been reported. And the likelihood is that your paper is going to get rejected. So it needs to be something worthy of investigating, something that's worthy of publishing. All right? And then oftentimes research is limited by time. You have to be done within a certain amount of time with a project. So don't pick a project with such a large scope that you'll never finish it in the amount of time that you have allotted. You may say, I'm going to go somewhere for 2 years. So pick a project that's going to take you 2 years. If you think it's going to take you 2 years, you have 2 years, you're probably wrong. It's probably going to take you 3 or 4 years. All right. So I always say double your estimate about how long something is going to take, because it's never that easy. And remember that the part of the research, other than collecting data, is analysis of data. There are often failures that go on in research, and then writing about the data. So you have to have time to do all those things. I often think it's better when you start to do research to do it in an established lab. All right. So find a project that interests you. Find someone else that's working on that project, and find some way to become involved in the lab. Oftentimes it involves starting by washing glassware, mixing solutions, etc. And eventually you get into doing real parts of the research, and the investigator discovers that maybe you're a worthwhile member of the lab, and you start to have your own individual projects as you start to be them. But once again, it's a process of time. Funding is often difficult. In the United States, at least research funding through the NIH is diminishing. To be able to get a grant to do research takes a long time. There's often a lot of rejections in doing it. That's why it's often better to work in an established lab, because they've often established their funding source, and hopefully the funding source continues through the end of the project. All right, so funding is always an issue. Paulo talked about the steps in doing research, so this is just a reiteration of what we've talked about. One, define the project and its scope. something interesting, something worthy of investigation. And then you have to go and do a bunch of reading and a bunch of knowledge acquisition, which means you go to the internet, which is great. I remember when I was starting out in medicine, there was no such thing as the internet. You would go to the library, you'd pull all the articles, you'd copy them, you'd sit back and read them. Life is so much more efficient now with the internet. Even in third world countries, you can get all the information you want at the touch of a finger, as long as you have the internet. And in fact, I can sit here today and go to my medical school library, search all the papers I want, download them into my computer. This is a tremendously efficient process, but you have to spend time reading those papers and becoming aware of the techniques that are out there. Once again, you don't have to learn to do everything from ground zero. Sometimes people have done things already and have done a lot of groundwork for a project that may interest you. Utilize that experience when doing your research. Physical location, decide where you're going to go, whether it's an established lab, someone's going to help you set up a lab. When I did my neurosurgery research, someone had an idea of a project they wanted to do, but said, here's $50,000, order what you want for the lab and get it set up. But that was all work that I had to do before I went into my research year. Set up, which is basically, so funding, which goes without saying you have to do, and then data acquisition analysis. And this is the part of research that is often fraught with agony. There's often a lot of failures before you hit on something. So be prepared for those failures. Don't be frustrated by the failures, but use it to learn what the next best direction is and how to proceed. Right, which may take as long as all the rest of it, unfortunately, or fortunately. And some people hate writing. Me, I hate writing a lot. So I try not to write too much. Luckily, I have residents that like to write, and will produce stuff for us. We should at least briefly talk about levels of evidence, because that's so pervasive in medicine and scientific literature now. So you have to know what each level is. And this is just from the original article that was published about the levels of evidence, but each column essentially relates to a specific sort of topic. But we know that level 1 evidence is essentially systematic review with randomized control trials. So is prospective randomized really a term? No, don't use prospective randomized. If it's randomized, it's prospective. It's included in the word randomized. So never write a title of a paper, prospective randomized. Just say randomized. All right, that's just one of my sort of pet peeves. All right, if it's randomized, it's prospective. It has to be. All right, so level 1 evidence is good research, randomized controlled trials. And we'll talk about strength of evidence a little bit down the road, A, B, C, and D. All right. Level 2 evidence are basically good controlled cohort studies or less well done randomized controlled trials. Level 3 evidence, it used to be case series, but once again, it's less well done randomized controlled trials or less well done cohort trials, etc. And then level 4 tends to be case series, and level 5 is expert opinion. So those are the levels of evidence that you look for. And you should always try to publish your work at the highest level of evidence that you can find, because it's the most meaningful. It has the highest impact. And these are just grades of recommendations showing you that an A recommendation is consistent level 1 studies, B consistent level 2 or 3 studies, or extrapolations from level 1 studies. So less well done level 1 studies, and the rest of it you can see. But C and D are not strong recommendations. So case series and expert opinion. So once again, we go back to this, and no class 1 evidence for this. However, there was a paper published last year using crash test dummies, looking at the safety of parachutes. And it turns out that parachutes actually are safer for you when you jump out of an airplane than just randomly hitting the ground. Hard to believe, isn't it? Thank you.